Welcome back to Tight Lining Maryland. First and foremost, I know that I haven't been putting out a lot of videos this year, and I appreciate all those that are watching this. Whether you're new to the channel or you've been following for however many years, I appreciate you and thanks for tuning back in. Today what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little different. Basically, I've been guiding now for a little over a year, and across the 40 different trips that I've taken with people, I'm starting to notice some tendencies, and those tendencies are things that are correctable. Those tendencies are things that I think if people just pay attention to the little minute details, they can have a world of better success. So today's video is going to be about the 5 different things that I think people can do when they're Euro nymphing to basically catch more fish and hopefully land more fish. We're gonna cover things like hook sets, dead drifts, casting, and fighting fish. Those are gonna be 4 things that I think are inevitably gonna give you a higher rate of success on the water and inevitably make your trips just a little bit more fun. So thank you to everybody that's been watching the channel. If you've gone out on a trip with me, I greatly appreciate it, or in any way, shape, or form that you've supported, whether it's buying flies from the website, which we'll be using some of those. Everybody has just been so supportive, and I really, really thank you. So if you wanna get on the books, I have maybe 2 or 3 different slots available for the summer, because that's pretty much booked up, and then the fall I've got availability. So let's get out on a stream and put you on some fish. But for today, let's teach you the top 5 things to hopefully help you the next time you go out on your own. So today what we're using is an Orvis Clearwater rod. This Orvis Clearwater is a 10-foot 3-weight, and on there it's got European Tactical nymphing line. What we're using is my standard mono rig, and it kind of goes the length of the rod plus a little bit more. On there I've got about, I think it's about 4 or 5 feet of tippet, and we're only using 1 fly right now because the flows are pretty low, and a single fly is enough to get it down and get the job done. So what we're using is a CDC France fly. So point number 1 that we're going to make here is how you need to tuck your flies. If you look at this run over here, I've got a fast kind of run on the far side, and it's got a little bit of a drop off or a ledge, but in order to get those flies, especially if you're using single flies down, you're really gonna have to tuck your flies. So let me get over here and show you and demonstrate basically how to do this. That way the next time you hit the stream, you can get your flies to depth a little bit more quickly in this faster water and pick up some more fish. All right, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm not sure if you can, but I gotta get an external mic at some point. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna demonstrate a way to do a tuck cast. So that tuck cast, what you're gonna do is you're basically gonna make the cast, and you're gonna stop your rod tip high and let those flies get down. You're gonna keep your sighter off the water, and basically what it'll do is it'll allow for those flies to drive themselves down and really get to depth quickly. If you stop your rod tip on a high angle, and basically let those flies clear the rod tip, nothing snacks the water, just the fly. You get a fly first entry, and at that point what you're doing is you're allowing those flies to get to depth as quickly as possible and hopefully getting to the bottom and putting you where the fish are. All right, so let's get into point number 2, which I think is critical. It's one thing to get a good tuck cast because you need to get those flies down and you want to be able to have a fighting chance at getting to depth for these fish. But the other thing I want to talk about is hook sets. On a lot of my trips, what I'm noticing is that, especially with Euro nymphing, sometimes you're ticking the bottom. So what I'll find is that people, when they make a cast, if they think that they're touching the bottom, they'll just kind of like lift up. Well, there's a fish. That really doesn't demonstrate a good point here, but I'll bring this fish in and then we'll talk about the point that we need to make with why hook sets are important. Well, that I think speaks to my point. So that'll actually cover 2 points, but back to where I was going with that. Basically what I'm finding is that sometimes people and I was just kind of demonstrating that exact point, is they'll do a small little, like, you know, once they make the cast, they'll just kind of like lift up. They'll do a small little check, right? They'll just basically look in to see, you know, were my flies on the bottom or was that a fish? So we'll just do a small little lift. All right, well, that lift, what you're doing is that, yes, if you're on a rock, it's going to come off, or potentially figure out if it's a rock. But if it's a fish like that was, the problem is that, you know, what's going to end up happening is that you're going to pull that hook slightly into the fish's mouth, and what he's going to do is he's immediately going to start to fight you and probably even try to spit or eject that hook. So what you want to do, and I'll demonstrate here a more proper technique that'll hopefully yield you some more fish, is that, you know, if you make a cast and you say to yourself, all right, well, I think that's a fish and not the bottom, you're going to hook set, and you're going to do it enough just with your wrist. If you watch my wrist right here, enough force that basically it's going to drive those flies down the stream backwards. So here we go, boom, wrist flick, and they're out and they're down. And the other thing that you can do is when you send these down, boom, you can turn that right into your back cast. So like my cast and my stroke off of this hook set, boom, here they go, back and then right back in. You can really make that a 1-2 punch, but you can't fight, or excuse me, you can't hook set on fish just by doing a small little rod tip lift. And if in fact that rock was a fish, you're going to miss out on a lot. So let's demonstrate what a good hook set looks like on an actual fish. There we go. All right, so that hook set, just that small little wrist flick, it sends it just deep enough into the fish's mouth so that hopefully, you know, you penetrate that lip, and it should be enough to hopefully keep that fish pinned. And that fish still has a hook in his mouth, even though he's rolled around on a barbless hook in the net a couple times. So it just makes a world of difference. The little things on, you know, checking your flies versus, you know, really thinking that you got a fish. You'd be amazed how many fish you will have hit in a given drift if you're doing things right, or in a set of drifts from this section on up. I mean, I've already hooked 3 fish here, one of which was an accident, and then actually another one where I just didn't get, I guess, a firm enough hook set into them. But that wrist flick is all you really need. The next thing I see is that people oftentimes, when they make a cast, they get way too high up on top of their system and basically create like a little north-south, straight up and down, you know, drift. Hopefully you can see it here on the screen. I'll try to do it a little bit closer to myself. But basically what they do is that if this were their cast and their flies are right in front of you, that cider material is like right down on a straight down plane. It's basically perpendicular to the water. What you really need is a, you know, a north, or excuse me, not a north-south lead, but more of a 45-degree angle where you kind of lead those flies. Think of it like walking a dog. I heard that on the podcast of Trout Bitten, and it really resonated with me. If you've ever walked a dog, you don't want the dog to be pulling you, and you don't want to be pulling the dog. So whenever my drift is coming through, I like that 45-degree plane of, instead of like we talked about before, where the mistake is that people do, they get up on top and they get, you know, straight up and down. Yeah, there's a time and place for that, but right now in this shallow riffle and run, that's not really it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to demonstrate how to basically stay out in front. You're going to lead with that rod tip, and you're going to get that, you know, basically 45-degree angle to have a little bit more sensitivity on if you get a take or an eat. You know, it makes a world of difference whenever you get the right angles. I like a small sag in mine, and there you go, to basically make sure that as I'm leading those flies, if something were to take, that more or less I can kind of tell right away what's going on, because that line's gonna straighten up just a little bit, and I'll know that basically I've got a fish. So here's that fish as a result of making sure that when we walk the dog, we're not pulling on it, and then hopefully these little guys will pull on our line, and we'll know that we got them. So let's take out this little fly, get this guy back in. Thanks for playing along and helping to demonstrate our point. Now what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate for you how to fight fish. This is something where I think that if you're smart about what you're doing and how quickly you do it, inevitably what's going to happen is you're going to yield better results on the overall hookup to land ratio, because far too often what I'm seeing is that people will allow fish to get downstream of them and basically you know, let the fish control the fight. So what I'm going to demonstrate for you here is the quick hook setting and making sure that we use the current to bring those fish upstream, but also then using the current to bring it back to us whenever it's time to land those fish. So let's hopefully hook up with a fish here and show you exactly what I mean. Basically, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to, depending upon where we hook them in the drift, you know, if it's on the front end up there, you know, if we had a fish hit, boom, right there, you know, our odds of keeping those fish upstream are pretty strong. But if God forbid we get a fish to hit right there, it makes things a little different on what you got to do. I mean, at that point, if you get one on the backside of your drift, you're going to need to immediately rotate your wrist upstream and try to force that fish up. There we go. All right, so that fish was trying to get downstream of me there, and what I did is I quickly rotated the fish back up. And the other thing that I talk about with clients is trying to keep, and I know it's a little hard to see right now, but I'll try to tilt myself back and allow that fish to go back into the center of the riffle. But I like to keep a, you know, kind of a C in the rod, where basically as I'm fighting, I want that fish to kind of like dog me or push me back upstream. And you know, I don't want to rotate that rod down. I don't want that fish to get up here, because if I let him get downstream of me, what typically happens is, number one, I might get a little bit of slack, and number two, those fish will come up in the water column and they'll start to thrash. You'll notice that this fish right now, all I've got is tension on him. I'm keeping him upstream. You know, now he's starting to fight a little bit, but he's never come up. And now that I'm ready to bring him up, push him back to me, now I can kind of lift his head, put him right up on the top, and then boom, right into the net. So it's a little guy, it's a little you know, easier to fight those guys, but in general, try to make sure that even on the small or all the way up to the big guys, that you allow for your flies to get down to depth, get your hook set. If a fish were to run downstream, you immediately rotate, get that low rod angle, keep the C in it, keep the bend, force them up, and then basically when you're ready to lift that head, you use the current to kind of push them right back to you, and you scoop them right up. All right, so we got a beautiful long run here. It should hold a lot of fish, and give me a couple opportunities to demonstrate the last two things that I want to cover here today for this section. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the difference between casting and lobbing. While out on trips, what I find is that a lot of times some of the guests will basically lob a cast, and what we're saying by that is that they're basically just kind of heaving those flies over the end of the rod tip and up into the sky and just kind of splatting them on the water. So what I would like to demonstrate for you is the difference between casting and lobbing. So let's take a look. So here is what I usually see that we'll talk about, you know, what's wrong with it, and basically then hopefully put some technique into a cast versus a lob. So here's the lob. What a lot of people will do is they'll get their flies downstream of them. So they got them in the water. Let's assume that they're water loaded, and what they're going to do is they're basically just going to take their rod tip with the reel seat up and their thumb kind of pointing towards the sky, and they'll just flick it and lob it straight up. So we'll do that again. They'll just basically take it downstream and they'll flick those flies straight up, and then they'll basically try to get a, you know, European nymph drift. Here's the problem with doing it that way. Whenever you do a lob, number one, what you're doing is you're potentially setting up a bad habit to basically get lodged in trees and other obstructions, you know, anywhere around the stream. So I'm really not a fan of the lob, where basically you're just hoping that those flies land where you want. And in essence, the other thing that it does is it really splats that bead in those flies or set of flies, you know, on the water pretty hard for fish. So you're sending kind of an alert system, but also, most importantly, you're probably potentially going to get hung up. So a cast, on the other hand, I'll show you what that looks like. What I'll do, and I'll slide up into the frame, is I'll put my flies downstream of me and water load the cast, and instead of going reel seat kind of up and pointing towards the sky, I'll instead put it across the stream on a sideways angle, and I'll use my wrist as opposed to going up and over like a lob. I'll basically just keep it on a sideways angle, push my my thumb to really kind of get a hold of that rod, and do a little wrist flick and send those flies upstream and basically drive them where I want, you know, kind of the target to be. So I'll do that again. We'll put our finger right there on that, you know, the end of the cork. We'll do a little flick, boom, sends them all the way up the stream. And then at that point, we engage our drift and we try to stay up on top like we talked about with that little 45-degree angle. The other thing you can do is you can do more of a an actual cast. You know, you can do some back casts, send those things down. And then at that point, the other thing that I like to do sometimes is I'll use my right hand or my offhand to basically make sure that I'm managing the line. So when I make a cast like that, I'm using my right hand to basically keep that line tight and stay in contact with my fly so that hopefully I can get a dead drift. So again, the importance of casting is really critical. I think that it's often overlooked with European nymphing. People assume we just kind of chuck and duck. Basically, you know, we get down here, we send those flies, we smack our rod tip on the water. That can't be the case, and that's the other problem with lobbing. I noticed that a lot of times what some of the guests will do is that basically they take their flies and then they smack that rod tip down here. They don't finish high. Do it again. We finish high. Flies go in first. We lead. Stay out in front. And there we go. Little fish, little brown trout. Tiny little guy. But again, it may not be a big fish, but it definitely proves the point. This little guy would have been tucked down on the bottom. The only way to get down there to him is to tuck your flies and get them down to depth for those fish. Alrighty, so that's going to wrap it up for tight lining Maryland. I hope that some of the tips that I provided for you today and the differences between how some people lob versus when you can tuck. Some people fight fish downstream or right across stream from them, let them get in the top versus, you know, keeping that sea in the rod and putting them down. I think that, you know, people staying up on top of their drifts versus getting out in front and kind of leading those flies. Just some of the top 5 things that I see on a consistent basis that I think if you cut it down and you work on your craft, you'll see a load of improvement. And although no, we didn't catch any huge fish today, we still demonstrated the points. Those points are absolutely going to be valid on other streams, and you know, heck, it might land you a 20-inch fish someday. You never know. Get yourself a whiskey. So thank you as always for tuning back in. I really appreciate all the support. If you want one of the leaders like I used in the video today, or even the CDC France fly, which was an absolute killer before we turn on the camera, as well as even picking up a few on camera for you, head on over to the store. If you're looking to do a guided trip, consider reaching out as soon as possible. I only have a couple spots left for the summer because I have 12 trips between now and basically the beginning of August. So if you want to get something in, let's do that as soon as possible. And if not, let's head out this fall. But tight lines, everybody. I hope that you can employ some of these strategies the next time you hit the stream, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.